it's not so it's not so easy to comment on the individual groups, but I think it was very interesting to hear these various reflections and these results of the group work, and I think there were many interesting things and a few good provocations also. Maybe I especially liked the group 2, the first sketch, that whatever happens, this new development should never be a new city wall between the water and the city. I think that is maybe the major point I can see that should be prevented. And maybe I can use the example of the harbor of Oslo, the harbor front in Oslo, because they also had a long linear thing which they should develop. And instead of saying, can we have some architects to address the waterfront, they say, we have 5 wedges into the old city, into the existing city. And could we have the architects to address these wedges so that everything was put into how to connect the water with the city, the hinterland, and not to make the linear waterfront as a primary concern. I think that is an excellent way of actually addressing this, because nobody in their minds would walk from one end of this to the other end of this. The prime directions would be towards the land behind, and that would be, to me, all important that these connections are really developed. So I like that the group 2, the first sketch, because I really think that it pointed to something important. I made in my talk, I made a reference to these 12 points of quality, which happens to be in Estonian in this particular book. Actually, this book contains everything I know after 40 years of research. And one of the things here which is written is that to make a good city in the 21st century, go for the ground floor. Make a fantastic city at ground floor and forget about all the rest. I learned that from Ralph Erskine, who said that the thing to do is to use all your money on the ground floor, make a fantastic ground floor, and nobody would see what the other floors are like. Because when you move around, it's a ground floor which means something. It's that what you see, and man is horizontal. He doesn't see anything up. So ground floor is really crucial. And I know of several schemes, like say in Copenhagen, we have a very good city architect now. Hasn't always been a good one, but it's a good one now. And she said that the only thing in the new towns she looks after is how they treat the ground floors. So I would say the scale of the spaces and the ground floors, they're the key words. And there was this idea of having temporary parking in the ground floor, and later on when the bus comes, you could take the parking away. Forget it. That's never happened in the history of mankind. You just make a city which for one generation of kids would be awful, and for the second generation of kids would also be awful. You'll never get those cars out, and you'll never have people to sell their cars to go into the bus when you have provided for it. I think it could be a much better idea to provide a shuttle bus if the real public transportation comes a bit later. It may be easier and cheaper than making all these ground floors. I mentioned this thing about retail washing. And I mentioned also that what we do in Denmark, because we realize there's not retail enough for all these new ground floors. But we have found that if you really elaborate the section of the residential houses and give the ground floor and the second floor people ample outdoor spaces at ground level, that could be easily as interesting as if it was some of these retail things we talk about. And you can see this ground floor treatment in the new towns, the new towns in Copenhagen. Don't look at the Ørestad, by the way. When people say, why do they make a new town like Ørestad in Denmark? And I would say, it's made by some Finns. But that's not true. They made the competition projects, but of course, the Danish building committee could have stopped some of the things. I think that I think that make the scale right. I know we've been asked several times to come to a new town which doesn't work and say, can you fix something here so it works? And we found it's impossible. Because when you have made the spaces too big, when you have put the entrances the wrong places, when you have made the edges hard, it's almost impossible to do anything. The money has been used and the scale is wrong. And in one case, the only thing which was to do was to buy 200 yellow chairs and put them in and say to the people, you can use these chairs as you like. But so make it right from the first stage. That's very important. Behind many of these things, I think that there are actually, also in Estonian here, many good advice for people doing new towns, and I could refer to them. One of them is, always make things smaller than you think is needed. That was my old professor who said that all the time. When you expect 200 people to a lecture, find a room for 100 people, and then when the first 100 has come in, the other one come in and say, oh, it's completely full. It must be a good lecture. And then they stand in the corridors and out and look through the door and try to get a glimpse of what's going on. They realize this is it, this is the event, and the space is small, and the professor comes in to give the lecture and see all these people crowded, and he realizes that all of them are expecting something particular, and he delivers something extremely good. The other scenario is you expect 100 people and you get an auditorium for 500 and they scatter all over the place. And every one of them are sitting thinking about what else is going on in university today. Where are the other ones? Have I missed out on something? And when the professor comes in and sees them scatter, he says, oh, this is the non-event of the year. It's like a party. If you have a party and scatter too few people over 3 spaces, and worse still, over 2 stories, then you have the most lousy party in the world. Everybody will think maybe it's more fun upstairs. They go upstairs, it's not more fun. Then maybe it started to be fun downstairs, they go down, that's not more fun. Put all of them in the kitchen and you will have a good party. And in all the new towns I know, they have far too much space to far too few people. In new developments today, you just have a fraction of the people which used to live in the old city districts. In Copenhagen, we figured out we have about 11% of the persons in a new in the same areas as 100 years ago. Households are smaller, and everyone can afford more square meters. So we have small households, and each person have many square meters. And if you count all of them, there are not that many people. So my advice always with new towns is make as few spaces as possible. I was just down in a German city where they proudly showed all their parks and outdoor spaces, fantastic. And then they said, and then we have the roof gardens where everybody can grow vegetables, and we have restaurants up there, everything. I said, these few people who live here, shall they be on the street and the roof and the balcony at the same time? They cannot. So you will have, don't scatter, concentrate, make small space and do very fantastic ground floors. And you don't need retail. You can use ordinary people and children playing and old people sitting in front of the house to look after things if you do it properly. So ground floor is everything, and whatever is about that, that is not interesting. And don't make too many spaces for too few people. And what else are here? Yeah, that's a general question. I started to think about, does anybody have an idea what kind of city Tallinn wants to be 20 years from now? it's all this which I heard was something about business as usual. They should have parking, and there may be a few bicycles, or there may be some walking, and there may be a ferry boat which takes people around. But I think it's so important to have a vision, as we have in Copenhagen, where they have a strong vision that we want Copenhagen to be the best city for people in the world. And they have a list of things they should do by 2020 and by 2025. They also have another strategy. We will be the best city for bicycles in the world. And they again know, and when a developer comes, the city architect would say, what have you done for this vision of best city for people in the world? And what have you done for this vision of best city for bicycles? And if the developer cannot answer very precisely, our great city architect will say, I think time is for you to go home and look at your project once again and come back when you can see your project fitting in to the strategy of this city where we want to be in 10 and 15 and 20 years. So I didn't hear anything about where Tallinn wants to be. But that's very important to start with that question and not just go on and adding more things in business as usual.